Marcy's journal is great because it operates on two different levels. There's the external level, what she is actually saying, and then there is the internal, implicit level, what is actually being conveyed. Marcy's journal is a long series of descriptions given by Marcy from her point of view of her journeys before, during, and after Amphibia. The earlier sections are much more interesting because they cover information we didn't have before. They start with her time landing in Newtopia and her mix of exhilaration, rapt anticipation to find her friends, and latent guilt over what she did and whether she should tell them what she did. Afterward, her journal progresses into the events of the series and becomes somewhat less interesting, but still quite compelling, because it gives events from Marcy's perspective, not in this kind of cartoony way where she makes everything about herself, but in a much more subtle way where she interprets events in a way that back up her existing worldview and belief system. For instance, she interprets Anne and Sasha's rift to be much less serious than it actually is, because she deeply, deeply cares about Anne and Sasha. She has a very passionate, caring, tender love for both of them that can tip into awe at some points. And while one doesn't necessarily need to read her feelings for either of her friends as romantic or romantically tinged, it's not that hard to. There is a particular description of Sasha that is very emphatic in a way that is perhaps in line with Marcy's very passionate descriptions of everything, and especially her friends, but could very easily be read in a more romantic light, let's say. But she very much wants her friends to patch things up. She very much treasures the dynamic they had beforehand and wants that preserved. So there are some interesting tidbits there. There are some fascinating parts where I wanted more insight from Marcy's perspective, and it is provided, such as when Anne leaves her so quickly to go back to join the Planters, and Marcy feels this sense of profound disorientation. She feels that she's been displaced in a way, that she's finally found her best friend in the world, and her best friend does not care about her as much as she used to. All this is implied in the show, and I don't think you can fully understand the choices Marcy makes in the episodes leading up to True Colors unless you fully grasp that, but the journal makes it much more explicit. Then there's Season 3, which is much less interesting to read about, because, number one, Marcy is out for most of it, and her journal entries are taken over by Anne. I have nothing against Anne. It's always good to get more insight psychologically into these characters, but we already know Anne's perspective. We don't need more Anne. My biggest gripe with Season 3 is that it is too Anne-centric, especially Anne at home on Earth. And then we get the rest of Marcy's story in Season 3B, which is fine in Marcy's telling, but it has a lot of the same problems that I just had with the story when it was airing, which is that Marcy's psychological grievances, which are real and genuine, not that one needs to take her side about everything, but her complaints about her life on Earth and how disorienting that it is going to be for her just kind of swept under the rug. And then there are some quite touching passages written later about her reconnecting with her friends. How their friendship isn't quite as strong as it used to be, but it's still strong and they can still reconnect. And then there's a little hint about maybe they can go back to Amphibia at some point. So that's what the journal is. It's perhaps not as insightful as it could have been, and I personally would have been fine if they had just not done any of the Anne sections. Not really done a lot of Season 3 as a whole if they're not going to do anything with Marcy being possessed, taken over by the core, and focused more on other aspects of her journey. But what's really interesting is what is implied, what is not said. Jean-Paul Sartre talks about bad faith as being something that's more complicated than just dishonesty. It's constructing an image of oneself that is not quite true, that is not based on one's behavior and one's interactions with the world, but instead is abstract. It is the process of making a self-image that's not a lie in the sense that it is a deliberate untruth, but it is fallacious. It does not relate to how one actually is and behaves in the world, which for Sartre, as the existentialist, is where one's essence is. One's essence comes in how one interacts with the world. It does not exist a priori outside of that interaction between self, between one's being in the world and the world itself. Marcy wants to think of herself as a generous person. And to a certain extent she is. She genuinely wants to help the people of Newtopia. She does help them in a lot of ways. She's a brave leader, and the book goes into her trials with the Newtopia Guard and her experiences and journeys there, which honestly are not particularly interesting and read as much like D&D adventures or creatures in caverns it would be for Marcy than anything else. But those adventures are nonetheless interesting because they represent Marcy trying not to think about Anne and trying not to think about Sasha, except in this very deliberately rosy light. It's not that Marcy is lying when she says that she hopes that Anne and Sasha are doing great things and having a happy life, just like she's not lying when she is framing their friendship as being mostly good, but just kind of flawed in a few ways, and just hopefully everything can be put back together. But she's seeing things how she wants to see them. Even when she learns about how Anne has suffered, and especially what happened to Sasha, she tries to always frame it in a positive light, tries to frame it as, oh, they're doing great now. See what they've overcome, see how they've triumphed. All of this is clearly in service of her justifying what she did. And she doesn't know how they will take it, so she doesn't tell them. And she keeps waiting and waiting and not telling them until it's too late. Certainly, if she told them at any point, it would have been not pleasant, but the fact of her concealment, the fact of her not telling, just makes things worse and worse in the long run. We see her be somewhat dismissive toward the planters, which is showcased in the show, although again that's framed in the context of Anne certainly preferring the planters over her in a lot of ways. Her deep and passionate love for Anne is very clear. She is deeply concerned about her two friends. She wants nothing more than to just have adventures with them always. Marcy's voice is fun throughout. It's clear how much of a nerd she is, and she interprets what she sees through the tropes and conventions of fantasy fiction, which is quite charming. But she reveals more than she is trying to. As much as she emphasizes that everything's great, and as much as she emphasizes all the good she's doing, her guilt still lingers. And that's one thing the journal does a very good job of conveying. Heidegger, in a similar vein to Sartre, talks about the impotence of pure wishing in his philosophical masterwork, Being in Time. Wishing meaning a kind of projection of one's own fancies that's outside of how one is actually interacting with the world. It is a hope that has no anchor in reality, and so does nothing but cloud the mind with delusions and misperceptions about the world. Marcy falls victim to this kind of vain wishing. She cares about everyone, and that care is deep, but it's also narrow. Marcy is fundamentally conservative in a lot of respects, in the sense that she just wants things to be as they were. Even as she has all these grand adventures in Newtopia, she's not looking to change things. She just immediately sees how great her life is there, which it is, and how she's valued there, much more so than she was at home, which she is. And she just wants everything to stay the same. She's not interested in challenging the status quo or these hierarchies of the world. And she's also not interested in challenging the problems of their friendship. She simply wants that to be put back in the same way it was. This, of course, cannot be. This, of course, is a kind of delusion. And yet it is a delusion that it's reasonable that Marcy buys into. I like the confirmation we get in the journal that one reason she bonded with Andreas is they both had strained relationships with their fathers who were quite stern and controlling in some regards. Marcy's father does not seem to be nearly as bad, but there is a commonality between them that Andreas offers in a way that is manipulative, but is also genuine in some way. I think he's being honest when he sees Marcy as being a reflection of himself in some way. He emphasizes that in order to persuade her, but it's real nonetheless. The emotionality is real. And so Marcy keeps on wishing. She keeps on desperately hoping that everything will turn out alright. Until she can't really pretend anymore. And that cut is very deliberate. In the Battle of the Bands episode, she is overjoyed. This is her dream. This is her greatest hope. Her friends are back together. She's in this world she loves. And she's just floating on this ocean of ecstasy, of deep love and whimsy and these hopes for the future that are, we know because we've seen this show, but we also know because we're adults with a detached perspective of things. These hopes are vain. They're silly in a lot of ways, but they're very genuine for her. She wanted a place where she could be someone. She wanted a place where she was respected and admired. She wanted a place where she could be with her friends, and Amphibia offers all of those things for her, and yet it comes at a cost. She feels a deep sense of guilt. She is, in a way, as controlling as Sasha, just in a very different vantage point. Sasha overtly controls people's actions and believes that she knows what is best for them. And sometimes she does. Sasha is a very smart, very charming, charismatic person and a great leader. She finds a job that is probably good for her, but one gets the sense that she could have done basically anything in life. They'd made her like a, I don't know, United States Senator or something. That would have been weird, but it wouldn't have been that weird. Sasha is that kind of person, and yet her controlling tendencies lead to her being isolated from her friends. Marcy is the opposite of that, and I think the Sasha and Marcy dynamic is one that's not fully explored in the show, although we get a bit more of it here. Sasha wants to control people overtly. Marcy controls people implicitly. She just wants everything to be perfect. She has these grand fantasies about how everything will be, and she just doesn't really want to check with other people because she has this deep, dark feeling within herself that it will disrupt those fancies, which eventually does end up happening. So I like Marcy's journal. I like it a lot. It provides a lot of psychological insight into who Marcy really is and how she approached the world and why she made the decisions that she did, as questionable as the after effects of those decisions may have been. It's not a perfect book, but it's an important and useful one for the Amphibia fans of the world. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. You want to see more videos like this one before anyone else. Take care, comrades. Adios.